The moment the electrician looked at me, I knew something was different, not because he said anything unusual, but because he looked at me like he already knew my entire story. My name is Daniel Brooks, and until that afternoon, I believed I understood my own life pretty well. I had lived in the same house outside Chicago for almost 8 years, followed the same routines, and built a comfortable life around keeping things simple. I was not someone who expected surprises. I liked knowing what was coming next. That was probably why the arrival of Mason Reed felt so strange. I called an electrician because the lights in my living room had started flickering, and I wanted the problem fixed before it became a bigger issue. I expected a quick appointment with a professional I would probably never see again. Instead, the moment Mason stepped through my front door, something about his reaction caught my attention. He looked around the house quietly, almost as if he was remembering something. Then his eyes met mine, and for a brief second, there was a look of recognition on his face. It was not the look of someone meeting a stranger. It was the look of someone seeing a person from a memory. I almost asked him if we had met before, but I stopped myself. It seemed impossible. I had never seen him before, and I was sure I would have remembered someone like him. Mason was calm, professional, and carried himself with a quiet confidence. He introduced himself, checked the electrical system, and explained what needed to be repaired. Everything about him seemed completely normal except for one thing. Every now and then, he would look at me with that same thoughtful expression, like there was something he wanted to say but decided not to. As he worked, I noticed small details that made me more curious. He knew the layout of older homes in my neighborhood. He recognized the original features of the house. He even mentioned that the place had changed a lot over the years. That comment stayed in my mind because it sounded like he had seen the house before. When I asked him about it, he simply smiled and said he had spent a lot of time in this area. It was a simple answer, but somehow it created more questions than it answered. The repair took less than 2 hours, but the conversation stayed with me long after Mason packed up his tools. Before leaving, he stood near the doorway and looked back at the house one more time. Then he looked at me and said something that I did not expect. He told me that sometimes people return to places they thought they had forgotten because certain memories are never really gone. I watched him walk away, wondering what that meant. How could a person I had never met speak as if he knew something about my past? I did not know it yet, but Mason Reed was not just another electrician who came to fix a problem in my home. He was someone connected to a part of my life I had completely forgotten, and that first strange look was only the beginning of a story I never saw coming. The strange thing about Mason Reed was not that he seemed familiar. It was that every small detail about his presence made me feel like I was missing a piece of a story I should have remembered. After he left my house that afternoon, I kept thinking about the way he looked around the rooms, the way he paused near the doorway, and the words he chose before walking away. I tried to convince myself that I was simply overthinking a normal interaction. An electrician had come to repair my lights, nothing more. But the feeling stayed with me. The following morning, I noticed something unusual near the old storage cabinet in my hallway. It was a small wooden box I had owned for years but rarely opened. Inside were old papers, photographs, and memories from a time in my life that I had not thought about in a long while. As I looked through them, I found myself remembering parts of my past that had slowly faded away. I remembered my old neighborhood, the people I used to know, and the years before my life became so predictable. For some reason, I kept thinking about Mason's comment about memories never really disappearing. A few days later, I received a message from the electrical company confirming the repair appointment details. At the bottom of the message was Mason's name. Seeing it again made me curious, so I searched for more information. About him, I did not find anything unusual. He was simply a licensed electrician with years of experience working in the area. Everything about him looked ordinary. That somehow made the mystery even more interesting. When I saw Mason again at a local hardware store, I decided to ask him directly if we had ever met before. He looked surprised, almost like he had expected the question but hoped I would never ask it. After a quiet moment, he said he was not sure if I remembered him. That answer immediately caught my attention. I asked him what he meant, and he explained that years ago, long before he became an electrician, he spent time around my neighborhood. He said he remembered this house because it was connected to an important period of his life. I wanted to know more, but Mason seemed careful with his words. He told me that some memories were complicated because they involved more than one person's perspective. His response left me with even more questions. How could my home be connected to his past? Why did he recognize me the moment he walked through my door? And why did he seem unsure whether he should tell me the truth? As we talked, I realized something important. Mason was not trying to create mystery. He was simply carrying a memory that he did not know how to explain. Before we separated, he told me that sometimes people forget moments that are unforgettable to someone else. That sentence stayed with me because I had a feeling he was talking about something we had both experienced. I just did not know what it was yet. I could not stop thinking about Mason Reed's words. The idea that someone could remember a moment that another person completely forgot felt strange to me. I had always believed that important memories were the ones we consciously chose to keep. But Mason made me question that. Maybe some moments stayed with people even when we had no idea they mattered. A few days after our conversation at the hardware store, I decided to look through more of my old belongings. I wanted to understand what connection Mason could possibly have to my past. I opened boxes I had not touched in years and found photographs, old letters, and small reminders of a life I had slowly moved away from. Looking through those memories felt like opening a door to a version of myself I barely recognized. Back then, I was more involved with my community and spent more time around my neighbors. Life felt less organized but somehow more connected. Then I found an old photograph that made me stop. It was a picture from a neighborhood event many years earlier. I looked closely at the people in the background, wondering if Mason was somewhere among them. I could not recognize him, but the possibility that he had been there made the mystery feel more real. The next time I saw Mason, I brought up the photograph. He looked at it carefully and smiled. He told me he remembered that day. He said the neighborhood had changed a lot since then, but many of the people who lived there had made a lasting impact on him. I asked him why he never simply told me that we had met before. Mason explained that he was not sure I would remember him, and he did not want to create an uncomfortable situation by bringing up a memory that only mattered to him. That answer surprised me because I realized Mason was not hiding the truth. He was protecting a moment he considered important. I asked him what exactly he remembered about me. For a few seconds, he was quiet. Then he told me about a time when he was younger and unsure about the direction of his life. He said he had been struggling to find confidence and figure out where he belonged. During that period, he noticed how I treated people around me. He remembered that I always made time to help others and made people feel welcome. I laughed because I did not remember doing anything special. To me, I was simply living my life. But Mason explained that sometimes people do not realize the influence they have on others. He said that seeing someone act with genuine kindness gave him encouragement during a time when he needed it. Hearing that made me think differently about my own actions. I had always assumed meaningful moments were created through big decisions or major achievements. Mason reminded me that sometimes a small gesture can stay with someone for years. Before we left, he told me there was another reason he remembered my house so clearly. He said the place was connected to one of the most important changes in his life. I looked at him, waiting for him to explain, but he only smiled and said that I would understand when the time was right. For the first time, I realized this story was not only about why Mason knew me. It was about discovering a part of my own past that I had forgotten. The more I learned about Mason Reed, the more I realized that the story he carried was connected to a version of my life I had almost forgotten. I had spent years believing that my past was simple. I remembered the major events, the important choices, and the moments that shaped who I became. But Mason showed me that sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that leave the deepest impressions. After our conversation about the old neighborhood event, I asked Mason if he could explain why my house meant so much to him. He looked around the room for a moment before answering. He told me that years ago, before becoming an electrician, he had been searching for direction in his life. He was unsure about his future and felt like he was standing between different paths without knowing which one to choose. During that time, he spent a lot of time walking around the neighborhood because it reminded him of simpler days. One afternoon, he stopped near my house and saw something that stayed with him. He saw a group of neighbors gathering together, helping each other with a community project. He noticed that everyone seemed connected, and he said one person in particular stood out because of the way they treated others. That person was me. I was surprised because I did not remember that day at all. Mason explained that he remembered watching me encourage people, offer help, and make others feel included. He said it was not because I did anything extraordinary. It was because I did something genuine at a time when he needed to see something positive. I told him that I never thought anyone noticed those things. I had always considered myself an ordinary person simply doing what felt right. Mason smiled and said that was exactly why the moment mattered. He believed kindness was most meaningful when people did not perform it for attention. His words made me think about all the times I had underestimated small actions. I remembered helping others, but I never imagined those moments could become important memories for someone else. As we continued talking, Mason revealed another detail that surprised me. He explained that my house had once been a place where he made an important decision about his future. Being around the people in the neighborhood helped him realize that he wanted a career where he could work with his hands and help people directly. That realization eventually led him to become an electrician. Hearing that made me understand why he looked at my home the way he did when he first arrived. He was not just remembering a building. He was remembering a turning point in his own life. For the first time, I understood the meaning behind his expression. He was not looking at me like a stranger who knew a secret. He was looking at me like someone who represented a memory that changed him. Before leaving that evening, Mason told me something I would not forget. He said we often have no idea how much we influence the lives of people around us. Sometimes, a simple moment that feels ordinary to us becomes a life-changing memory for someone else. As I watched him walk away, I realized I was not only learning about Mason's past, I was rediscovering my own. After discovering why Mason Reed looked at my house like it held a memory only he could see, I thought I finally understood everything. I believed the mystery was solved. Mason was simply someone whose past happened to connect with mine in a way neither of us expected. But the more we talked, the more I realized there were still pieces of the story that had not been revealed. A few days after our conversation, Mason returned to help me with another small electrical issue. This time, his visit felt completely different. He was no longer just the electrician who arrived at my door. He was someone I had started to understand, someone whose story had become connected with my own. While he worked, we talked about the neighborhood and how much it had changed over the years. Mason pointed out places that used to look different, small businesses that had disappeared, and familiar streets that carried memories for him. Listening to him made me realize how many stories existed around us that we never noticed. Every house, every street, and every person carried experiences that were invisible from the outside. Eventually, our conversation returned to the day he first came to my home. I asked him if he had recognized me immediately. Mason smiled and admitted that he had. He said he remembered my face from years earlier, but he was not certain whether I was the same person. That was why he stayed quiet at first. He did not want to make assumptions or make me feel uncomfortable. He wanted to be sure before bringing up a memory that meant so much to him. I appreciated that because it showed me something important about Mason. He was not someone who rushed into people's lives. He respected their space and allowed things to happen naturally. As we continued talking, Mason shared more about the period when he first saw me. He explained that he had been at a point where he needed encouragement but did not know where to find it. Seeing people in the neighborhood support each other gave him a different perspective. He realized that he wanted his future work to involve helping others in a practical way. That was the reason he chose a career as an electrician. He wanted to solve problems, improve people's homes, and leave behind something useful. I found it interesting because the person I thought was simply there to repair my lights had actually built his entire career around the same values I had unknowingly shown him years before. We both laughed about how unexpected life could be. A small moment that I barely remembered had become a turning point for someone else. As the afternoon came to an end, Mason thanked me for listening to his story. I told him I was the one who should be thanking him because he reminded me that our actions matter even when we never see the results. Before leaving, Mason paused at the doorway and looked back inside the house one more time. This time, I understood what that look meant. He was not seeing an old building. He was seeing a memory, a beginning, and a reminder of the person he wanted to become. But I also realized something else. While Mason had carried this memory for years, I had been carrying my own forgotten story. And soon, I would discover a truth about my past that would change the way I saw our connection. The more I learned about Mason Reed, the more I realized that our connection was not just about a forgotten memory from years ago. It was about two people who had unknowingly influenced each other in ways neither of us understood at the time. After Mason left that afternoon, I spent a long time thinking about his story and how strange it was that one ordinary day could remain so meaningful for one person while completely disappearing from another person's memory. I had always believed that the important moments in life were the ones we recognized immediately. The big decisions, the major achievements, and the obvious turning points. But Mason showed me that sometimes the moments that shape us are the ones we never realize are happening. A few days later, I invited Mason inside for coffee after he finished checking the electrical system in my house. It felt natural now, almost impossible to believe that only weeks earlier he had been a complete stranger standing at my front door. As we sat in the kitchen, our conversation moved from the past to the present. Mason asked me how I ended up staying in the same house for so many years. I told him that after a difficult period in my life, the house became a place where I felt comfortable and stable. It was a place where I could slow down and focus on what truly mattered. Mason listened carefully, and then he told me that he understood that feeling more than I might expect. He explained that for many years, he had been searching for a place where he felt like he belonged. He had moved between different jobs and different cities before finally finding a career that gave him purpose. What surprised me was how similar our experiences were. From the outside, our lives looked completely different. I owned a home and had a steady routine. Mason traveled for work and spent his days solving problems for other people. But underneath those differences, we both understood what it felt like to search for meaning. As we talked, Mason mentioned something that caught my attention. He said that when he first saw me years ago, he noticed that I seemed like someone who created a sense of belonging wherever I went. I laughed because I never saw myself that way. I always thought I was just a regular person trying to be helpful. Mason explained that people often underestimate the impact they have because they experience their own actions from the inside. They see their intentions, their doubts, and their imperfections. Other people only see the moments when they make a difference. His words stayed with me because they changed the way I viewed my own past. I started wondering how many other moments I had forgotten that might have mattered to someone else. Before he left, Mason looked around the house and said something that surprised me. He told me that this place represented more than a memory for him. It represented the moment when he started believing he could build a better future. Hearing that made me realize something important. I had spent years thinking my past was something I had left behind, but Mason had shown me that the past never truly disappears. It continues through the people we meet and the small choices we make. And as our conversation ended, I knew there was still more to discover about why our paths crossed again after all those years. I thought I understood the reason Mason Reed had entered my life again, but I soon realized that the story between us was not finished. The more we talked, the more I discovered that our connection was built on something deeper than a single memory. It was built on years of experiences, small choices, and moments that neither of us fully understood until we finally met again. A few weeks after our conversations began, Mason and I found ourselves talking more often. Sometimes he would stop by after finishing a nearby job, and sometimes we would simply exchange messages about ordinary things. What surprised me was how easy it felt. There was no pressure to create a friendship. It developed naturally through honesty and curiosity. One afternoon, Mason asked me if I had ever wondered about the people who passed through my life and disappeared without explanation. The question made me think about all the faces I had forgotten over the years. People I had spoken with briefly, people I had helped, and people who might have remembered me even when I never thought about them again. I told Mason that I had probably forgotten more moments than I could count. He nodded and said that was exactly why he believed our meeting was important. He explained that everyone leaves small pieces of themselves in the lives of others, even when they never see the results. As we talked, Mason shared more about his journey before becoming an electrician. He told me about the uncertainty he felt when he was younger and how difficult it was to choose a direction. He had spent years trying different jobs, always feeling like something was missing. What finally changed him was realizing that he wanted work that allowed him to help people in a practical way. He wanted to leave every place better than he found it. I told him that it was interesting because the person he became reflected the qualities he noticed in me years earlier. Mason smiled and said he never thought about it that way, but maybe that was true. Maybe the people who inspire us often become reminders of who we want to be. That conversation stayed with me because it showed me how connected our experiences can become. We often think of influence as something intentional, something created through big speeches or important decisions. But Mason reminded me that influence can happen quietly. It can happen through patience, kindness, or simply making someone feel seen. Later that week, I found an old notebook while cleaning a shelf in my office. Inside were notes from years ago, including reminders of projects and community events I had completely forgotten. Looking through those pages, I found a short entry about the neighborhood gathering Mason had mentioned. I still did not remember every detail, but seeing my own handwriting brought back pieces of that time. It made me realize that Mason was not the only one carrying forgotten memories. I had my own collection of moments waiting to be rediscovered. When I told Mason about the notebook, he became quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made me stop and think. He said maybe we had both needed this meeting, not because we were meant to rewrite the past, but because we were finally ready to understand it. And for the first time, I wondered if our reunion was not just a coincidence, but a chance for both of us to see our own stories differently. After finding the old notebook, I started looking at my own memories differently. For years, I believed that my past was a collection of events I had already understood. I thought the important moments were the ones I could clearly remember, while everything else was simply part of ordinary life. But Mason Reed helped me see that some of the most meaningful moments are often the ones we overlook. They stay hidden until something brings them back to the surface. A few days later, Mason and I met at a small coffee shop near my neighborhood. It had become our place to talk, a quiet space where we could share stories without the distractions of everyday life. I brought the notebook with me because I wanted to show him the notes I had found. As he looked through the pages, he smiled when he saw references to the community event from years ago. He said it was strange seeing the same moment from my perspective because his memory of that day was completely different. To me, it was simply an afternoon when neighbors came together. To him, it was the beginning of a new chapter. That difference made me realize how two people can experience the same moment and carry completely different meanings from it. Mason explained that after that day, he started making small changes in his life. He became more open to meeting new people, more willing to try different opportunities, and more confident about choosing a career that reflected who he wanted to become. He said he never forgot the feeling of seeing people help each other without expecting anything in return. It reminded him that a meaningful life was not only about personal success. It was also about the positive impact we leave on others. Listening to him made me reflect on my own choices. I realized that I had spent years focusing on what I had not accomplished instead of recognizing the ways I had already contributed. Mason did not see me as someone extraordinary. He simply saw a person who had made a difference during a moment when he needed encouragement. That perspective changed something inside me. As our friendship continued, I noticed that Mason also started seeing himself differently. He became more comfortable talking about his own achievements and accepting that his work had value. For a long time, he believed he was just someone who fixed problems for other people. But I reminded him that his work represented something much bigger. Every home he entered, every person he helped, and every problem he solved was another example of the impact he wanted to make. One evening, while walking through the neighborhood, we passed by the place where the community event had taken place years earlier. The area looked different, but the feeling was familiar. Mason stopped for a moment and said that he never imagined returning to that place with the person who had unknowingly influenced his future. I told him I never imagined meeting someone who remembered a version of me that I had forgotten. We both laughed because life had brought us together in the most unexpected way. That night, I understood something I had never considered before. Sometimes people enter our lives not to change our future, but to help us understand our past. Mason had not only reminded me of a forgotten memory, he had reminded me that every person has a story, and every story has moments that matter, even when we do not recognize them at the time. But as we continued talking, Mason revealed that there was still one final thing he had never told me about that day years ago. The final thing Mason Reed wanted to tell me was something I never expected, but it was also the missing piece that completed the story we had been slowly uncovering. We were standing near the same neighborhood street where so many years earlier, a simple moment had changed the direction of his life. The surroundings were different, but the meaning of that place remained the same. Mason looked at me and said there was one reason he remembered that day so clearly. It was not only because of the kindness he saw or the encouragement he felt. It was because that moment reminded him that people could make a difference without even knowing they were doing it. He told me that before he saw me helping others, he had convinced himself that his choices did not matter. He felt like he was just moving through life without a clear purpose. Watching people come together in that neighborhood showed him something he had forgotten. He realized that the world was shaped by small actions, and every person had the ability to create a positive impact. He said I was one of the first people who made him believe that idea again. Hearing that was overwhelming because I never thought I had done anything special. I had simply acted the way I believed people should treat each other. I never expected someone to remember it years later. But Mason reminded me that we rarely know the full effect of our actions. A kind word, a moment of patience, or a simple gesture can become something meaningful in another person's life. As we talked, I told Mason that he had changed my perspective too. Before meeting him again, I thought my past was something fixed, something that belonged behind me. But he helped me understand that our past is not just a collection of memories. It is also the influence we leave behind. The people we meet, the moments we share, and the choices we make continue to exist through the lives we touch. Mason smiled and said that maybe we both needed this unexpected reunion. He needed to remember where his journey began, and I needed to remember that my actions had value even when I did not see the results. From that day forward, our friendship continued to grow. Mason still worked as an electrician, solving problems in homes across the city. I continued with my own routine, but I carried a different understanding of the people around me. I started paying more attention to the small moments that were easy to overlook. I noticed the quiet kindness of strangers, the efforts people made without recognition, and the stories hidden behind everyday conversations. Looking back, I realized that Mason did not enter my life to reveal a secret. He entered my life to remind me of something I had forgotten about myself. The person who seemed like a stranger at my front door was actually someone connected to a chapter of my story I had never fully understood. The way he looked at me that first day was not because he knew everything about me. It was because he remembered something important that I had lost along the way. And that was the greatest lesson Mason gave me. Sometimes the people who know our stories are not the ones who have been with us the longest. Sometimes they are the ones who quietly remember the moments we never realized mattered.